If you've ever felt like your relationship with food, your body, or the scale was quietly running the show, this episode is for you. I'm sitting down with Paige Thompson, a Philadelphia based licensed counselor who specializes in eating disorders, disordered eating, and body image. And she works specifically with athletes and women in the perinatal season of life. A quick note before we dive in. The information and discussion in this episode is for informational purposes only and is not intended to treat or diagnose any condition. Please consult your doctor or a qualified medical professional for personalized guidance. Welcome to Miles from Review, the podcast powered by KatFit Strength, where busy women like you find practical solutions to fuel your fitness journey with authenticity and resilience. I'm Kat, your host, a mom of 2 active boys, a business owner, and an ultramarathon runner, and a strength trainer in her 40s. With nearly 2 decades of experience, I'm here to help you cut through the noise of fads, hacks, and quick fixes. This is a space where we celebrate womanhood and motherhood, all while building strength and resilience and reconnecting with you from a place of self-compassion and worthiness. Whether you're lacing up your running shoes to go out for a run, driving your kids to practice, or squeezing in a moment for yourself, I'm right here in the trenches with you. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Miles from Her View. I am Kat and I'm here with Paige today. Welcome, Paige.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and to chat.
I really feel this conversation is going to resonate with the audience. There's many women listening, and they are a wide range of listeners, from women who are chasing podiums to personal bests in their respective athletics, chasing toddlers and other kids around the house, and food and body image. It can get complicated fast, especially when you care about your performance and health. You work with athletes and women in the perinatal season and individuals navigating disorders and body image struggles. So we're going to dive in, and I want to hear from your perspective for women who train in any capacity. What is the biggest misunderstanding about food and health? This is a big one, so I'm throwing at you here.
I would say really just like how narrow of an understanding we have of like that food and health have this very linear, narrow idea of what is healthy and when it comes to food. And something I hear all the time is, and I'm sure you have heard it as well, is I feel off track or I fell off track, or I'm like, what track? There is no track. That health is so much more than the food that we put in our body. And that is certainly an aspect of it. But there are so many more factors that go into that. And I think all of these things obviously are extremely intertwined, but the idea that smaller is healthier, that whether that's smaller portions, smaller size of our body, smaller anything, I think there's a lot of societal conditioning that goes into that, obviously. But yeah, I think we have a relationship with food like we have a relationship with anything else in life, whether that's people, whether that's like people have a relationship with money, with material items, with social media. It's like how we relate to these things and the messages and that we've been given and then have been internalized over our life. So there's a lot of layers to what goes into our relationship with food. And when we're training, I think we're especially vulnerable, or we seek out even more messages around food, what we should be doing, what's best for us, what can help us in our sport. And while that information can be super helpful, it can also be super overwhelming and confusing.
I like what you said there. It's not linear. We tend to think of it as being very linear. And that is so true with, I'm going to say, everything in the fitness space, because I see it in my field where point A is starting point and goal is point B. I also like how you brought up that there's no track. And I think from my lens where I see, and I fall into that, I'm like, oh, I'm falling off the track or the wagon. I'm like, no, drop that from your language. But I think that comes from what we should, or what we think is this epitome of what we should be doing and what this incredible track is, like the perfect track.
Yes, that there's a right way to do whatever it is.
When I was an athlete, or I don't know if it's still floating around, but one thing I saw when I was a college athlete, it was athletes fuel everybody diets. It was like something that was floating around. And so in that concept, how do you see that conversation change around food when someone's goal is, I want to be strong and healthy, versus performance metrics?
Yeah. I think that message is probably well intentioned in the sense of you need to nourish yourself enough to be able to perform. But I think that, like you said, food is so much more dynamic than that, that there is room for food to also be, for there to be freedom and flexibility within fueling. That food is also, we can't even separate food from like culture. Like there's food is involved in celebrations and community events and bringing people together and ways that we grieve and ways that we show up for each other and yeah, express love and all of these things that like food is so intertwined in so many aspects of our life to the fuel idea is while it's valid and we do need to quote unquote fuel ourselves, it's an oversimplification of the role that food plays in our life. So I think that being able to hold a little bit of a broader idea of how food fits into our performance, it absolutely can be a tool that we use to help us get where we want to go in terms of getting the right nutrients and getting adequate nutrients and all of that. But I think when we have a little bit more flexibility around it, it allows us to stay grounded in our values too. I never want food to be something that takes away from somebody's like social life, like denying, like not going out to eat with friends because of the food that's going to be there, or like fearing what's going to be there when, you know, you're trying to also nourish yourself or fuel yourself for whether that's like a race or a performance or whatever it is, that like being able to have flexible goals or have multiple ways and variety of meeting those goals that fit into your life.
I like what you said there. It's we don't want it to limit us. And it is a huge part of culture and socialization. I cringe with stuff that you see in mainstream or whether it be on social media or whatnot is vilifying foods or cutting out whole food groups that creates that mistrust and complicates it. So
Yeah, I think too, like I always ask clients, like, we really do a deep dive into what is your definition of health. And it helps expand this idea of, yes, nutrition and food and even performance goals or strength goals are all a part of that. But like your definition of health for a lot of people also includes things like, I want healthy relationships or connection, or I want to feel fulfilled, or feeling like you are not lonely or have these connections. So I think that, yeah, the ways food limiting us in other ways is also not helping us achieve other forms of health. And those are really important ways of even tending to our mental health, also our physical health, that all of these performance things or activities and exercise can be done in community as well.
yeah. And I like how you have the client like identify what does that look for like for them, like really getting in touch. We have so many messages coming at us with all this stuff that it's hard in a very loud world to sit down and be like, what does this look like actually for me? That for me, when I do that with my clients, of let's sit down and really look at things. When clients do that, and I know when I do that for myself too, it clears a lot of that friction and creates more ease.
Mhm.
When I'm coaching my clients, it's almost the catalyst of them becoming that consistent individual who can work out. It stops that from all or nothing, that perfection seeking, that track that we all think we have to be on because it's very polluted with outside messaging and not what works for us and for the season that we're in at this moment.
Yeah. I think that's a great example of even like bringing it back to the track concept, that when we have a broader definition or we know even what our definition of health is, we can challenge those thinking traps or black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking a little bit better. Because like, okay, if I am saying that my brain is telling me, this critical voice is telling me that I fell off track because I went out to eat with friends and I had more than I thought, or it doesn't align with kind of what I intended my eating to look like that day, or I had a couple cocktails or whatever it is. Those things also actually can just go into a different bucket of health of, oh, okay, so that doesn't necessarily take away from nutrition, but it can add to, okay, I had connection, I had fulfilling interactions, I had enjoyment and pleasure. And if we're restricting ourselves of all of these other things, that's going to show up in our relationship with food too. And so I think it's balance.
Yeah. And I like that reframe of it's filling other buckets, which is so good because it's like again, we get so black and white. How have messages about like clean eating and shrinking your body or earning your food shaped the way women approach exercise?
That
I'm
is,
so interested to hear your take, and I see it a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that is a big one.
Yeah.
Have a whole episode on it.
And
My first thought is just like how like deeply ingrained these messages are in our society that we don't even realize how often and how much we're consuming them. It's like down to every single image that is put into our brain, implicit messages that are given that this is normal or this is what you should look like or this is what good eating is, and all this moral value assigned to things. I think when it comes to exercise, similar to placing moral value on food, I think we've placed moral value on not just movement, but like types of movement and intensity of movement and the way in which we're approaching it, and that we should love every moment of it. And all of these messages that if you don't do it this way, it invokes this sense of guilt. All of this being rooted too in a sense of diet culture, idealizing thinness and equating thinness to health. And I think that with all of that too, there can be this demonizing of rest, of like exercise at all costs, or the messages that are almost like not explicitly said, but maybe internalized over time. Like if I'm not exercising in this way or in the most intense way, then I'm lazy or then I'm undisciplined, and these aren't always like conscious or explicit thoughts. But I think that though in the work that I do, we really try and get what's underneath this idea that I like am beating myself up because I didn't make it to the gym today or because I quote unquote fell off track. And it's a lot of like self-worth that is tied to how we look, how active we are, what kind of movement we're doing, that there's a lot of moral value assigned to movement. And I think one example that comes to mind right now is even this, just the popularity of Pilates. And listen, I love Pilates, nothing against it. I think it's awesome. And I love that we're like moving into strength movement and all of these wonderful things about it. But then I like hear clients who go to a Pilates class and they feel like they can't go because their body isn't a Pilates body. And it's these subtle messages of you need to do this and you need to do it this way. But if you don't look this way while you're doing it, then you're not doing it right. And it's finding there's something wrong, whether it's the way you're nourishing yourself or the way you're exercising or the way your body looks while you're exercising. Is this idea that women are socialized to nitpick and find something wrong with whatever they're doing.
Are you curious about KatFit Strength? Well, KatFit Strength is designed to help you achieve your fitness goals with confidence and clarity. Whether you're a busy mom juggling multiple responsibilities, a woman navigating unique challenges of prenatal, postpartum, or perimenopause, or an athlete looking to enhance your performance, KatFit Strength has you covered. Let's get down to it. KatFit Strength offers personalized programs tailored to your unique needs, goals, and ensuring you get the most out of every workout. Expert guidance provided for you with the understanding of the importance of balancing strength training, cardio, and mobility. Flexible workouts designed to fit into your busy schedule, whether you're at home or at the gym or on the go. So why choose KatFit Strength? I believe in creating sustainable fitness habits that adapt to your lifestyle. I focus on helping you lift effectively, move better, and feel stronger every day. Plus, emphasis is on realistic goal setting, celebrating every win, and helping you stay motivated and inspired. Yeah, that drives me bonkers. I'm like, if I had a magic wand, I would take away this idea that there's a specific look tied to different activities. I'm a big runner, so you hear like the runner's body. Though it's just, I'm like, you have a body, you can run. Or hopefully it's going to the wayside. Block so much of this out because I'm like, I don't even want any of this in my space. But it's so cold here in the Northeast. And at some point we're coming up on spring break season, but it's like the bikini body or the bathing suit body. And it's like, no, you have a body where you feel comfortable. Don't allow other people's judgments or some marketing message to define the story that you're telling in your head, because you're not going to step into fully who you are. And it's I always say this messaging never became more apparent to me until I became a parent
Mhm.
because you see my kids are in middle school and high school. And so when they are toddlers and babies, they're like, the world is their oyster. They're exploring, they're doing anything. They have no problem being everything and anything that they want to be. Like they'll throw on their like superhero costume and wear it to the grocery store. They'll just do, and it's like along the way, we start to shrink in and become what the world is telling us. The one thing I always tell my kids, always turn inward and let that show outward. Be yourself. They've encountered words of unkindness from peers. And I'm like, just put up a barrier. Don't let that in, block it out. And that's where I feel with all this messaging in the wellness culture, it's so hard to block it out. And how do you find or, and again, I'll preface this when I ask this question because it can be a bit of a loaded question here, is we're not here to diagnose and treat. And this is educational purposes only, not diagnosing or treating. How do you, I'm going to say, help shape when it just feels so overwhelming to turn off that internal dialogue in the brain of shutting down those stories that have been in our head, whether consciously or subconsciously, and at this point becoming more consciously because you're actively trying to change that dialogue?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of like avenues, and I usually start with just trying to be more aware of what that internal dialogue is. I think sometimes we're familiar with it because it's been in our head, maybe even since we were a young child, that whether it's like writing it down or saying out loud, whether to a friend or a therapist or whoever, we often have there's like when we say it out loud, there's this sense of, oh, that is mean, or I wouldn't say that to my friend, or that's pretty harsh. Being with it a little bit more and practicing some awareness around what are these thoughts. I think some of them happen so automatically that we don't even realize how judgmental or mean we're being to ourselves. And then the other thing is being really curious about like, where did these come from? Sometimes it is as simple as societal messaging. Sometimes we can identify like a specific voice or a specific, even I think about a specific commercial or a specific book that we read or things like that, that really just for whatever reason in that time of our life, like stuck with us. Or maybe we read it in a really vulnerable time, or someone really important to us said this thing that was reinforced. Being able to be curious about where these messages are coming from, and then we can be like, okay, deciding, is that a value, or is that a thought or a message that really aligns with my values or that I want to act upon? And obviously this is a lot easier said than done and can even take years in therapy to go through, but it's a good place to start of like being curious about these messages, and not only the messages we've already consumed, but being aware of what we are consuming at the time. That I think that whether it's social media or the news or all these other things, that we're in a time right now where I feel like that messaging has even gotten louder. So it makes a lot of sense if that's feeling especially loud right now in our society. Trying to ground yourself in your values, whether that's wanting to move your body for enjoyment, for a sport, for a specific like accomplishment or achievement that you're trying to pursue, and stay grounded in what feels important to you.
You're so right. It's so loud.
Yes.
So loud. And I have conversations with my clients too. I'm like, I catch myself in the trap. And when you catch it, put your phone down, limit it. I'm in the business and I wind up being like, wait, second guessing things because things are meant to enrage you, evoke emotion, hook you in, question things, or just get in there and like needle at you. And it's like, no, shut it down. And I like how you said, bring it back, like to what is it aligned with you or not, and bringing it back. And I'm also glad that you said that it's not an overnight process. Does not mean that it won't work, but it can take years, and that's okay because it the work is good and it's going to help change and create that trust and comfort in your body and with movement and food. Yeah. This is similar. If there was like one belief that you wish every woman's or active woman would just unlearn, what would that be? I know I'm here for the loaded questions. I'm just throwing
Yes.
them at you.
Let's sum it down to one. That feels,
Yeah.
I'm probably going to give you more than one, but
For it. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be limited to one. That's the thing. It's like, it could be many.
yeah, I guess the overarching one would be like that your worth is not tied to your body, your movement, or your like food. That like those things are all going to change at various times in life. Like your movement routine is going to change based on what's going on in your life and what goals you're trying to achieve. Your relationship with food can shift based on all kinds of things, whether that's resources available or pregnancy or health things you're going through that change how your body is breaking down the food or what your hunger cues are, what actually sounds good. And then also our body is going to change over time. So I think not having our worth tied to those three things feels really important. That is a very loaded statement and a lot easier said than done. And I feel like some of the like maybe smaller things that like support that bigger idea of not having our worth wrapped up in that would be like breaking down the association of like smaller is better or thin equals health. Also think like there's no one right way to nourish yourself. I think that when it comes to like food specifically, like that even when you are trying to achieve, like I think about like Olympic athletes or like some super high level or very specific fitness goals, there is still room for preferences, enjoyable foods, and like flexibility. And if somebody's telling you otherwise, maybe it's time to find a new provider. It shouldn't be so rigid that it impacts your life in other negative ways.
100%. And one thing I say numerous times on the podcast is it's my favorite sentence. It's 2 words, bodies change. It holds no emotion. It's just bodies change. And I'm glad you said that. And one thing I hear, and I don't know if I found the right wording for it, but I hear a lot from the women I work with who typically are 35 and above. They're in the midst of building their families to their kids are being launched into the world. And what I hear is, oh, I'm not an athlete. And that just gets under my skin sometimes because for me, and I know there's a couple camps and I can understand somewhere where this is coming from, but there's the camp of you never played a competitive sport. And then there's the camp of you can be an athlete at any age, which I do side with that. But I'm going to interject my thoughts and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I'm basically like, life is an athletic event. And a little bit of like my own personal background, like I was a college athlete and I know I struggled with that athletic identity because I don't recall who said along the way was, I think, a fellow coach when I moved into coaching track and field. It was like, oh, you're no longer an athlete. And I was like, wait, what does that mean? Does that mean all my athletic accomplishments have wiped away? I was in my mid-20s being like, wait, what does that mean? Am I an athlete? I guess I'm not an athlete, even though I still work out and do all these things, et cetera. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Again, not divulging anything about your clients, but if a client was like, I'm not an athlete, but they want to engage, or a little bit more specific is I hear from running, oh, I'm not a real runner. And I'm like, you engage in a running practice, you run, you're like, and it's what defines this. So I think that is along the same lines of that athlete versus like non-athlete.
Yeah, I think that I'm probably in the same camp as you of yes, if you are doing activity, like if you want to be an athlete, you are an athlete. If you are training, if you're working towards something, even if you don't have a specific goal, you're moving your body, like you're an athlete. Like there's all different kinds of athletes too and different levels. Like there's agility and there's like very specific skills and there's endurance athletes and there's obviously anything from I do this because I enjoy it to like some amateur competitions all the way up to like the Olympic level. And every single one of those is a valid athlete. I do think that it's fascinating to dive into what is this self-limiting belief around I'm not an athlete and what function has that served. And at some point in your life in terms of like either feeling like it keeps you from a fear of failure. What if I try and I'm not good at this? Or what if I am not able to keep up? I think that's one end of it. This keeps me from trying or fully applying myself, or maybe even keeps us from creating community around being an athlete. And then there's the whole other kind of end where maybe our identity is wrapped up in being an athlete for most of our lives. I deeply resonated with what you said of being a college athlete and you graduate. And I have multiple people who have come to therapy for this specific reason, because their life went from being almost centered around their athletic pursuits to feeling like a lack of purpose or a like lack of identity. Now whether they're in the working world or whatever their life looks like, it's confusing to know, how do I even if I'm still engaging in physical activity, or even if I'm not, this was how I identified before. And sometimes people are like, everybody responds differently. So sometimes people dive into athletics in a whole new realm. You'll see like the people training for a marathon as soon as they graduate. And then you'll see, I have other people who I've talked to are like, I haven't worked out in a few years. And that I never would have thought that would have been me. And every response is valid, but you get to identify with being an athlete as much or as little as you want. I think it's cool to see how we integrate that into our life, that I think there's so many personality traits and life experiences that come with being an athlete that go well beyond the physical training. I think there can be grief with going from being an athlete being such a big part of your identity to trying to figure out where that fits into your identity, maybe not being like the sole thing post-grad life. And then I also think that for people who are hesitant to consider themselves athletes, that I would highly encourage people to not limit themselves in terms of the language they're using, and also like how that kind of translates to maybe even like how much they're pushing themselves or how much they feel like they fit into a certain community, or it almost sounds like there could be like some imposter syndrome there or things like that.
I'm kind of like, man, I wish I had you in my mid-20s because it is one of those things where I went through, track was my whole life. And I had plans to continue competing post-college, in which I had an undiagnosed injury and took years to diagnose. That's a whole other podcast if we want to go there. And so then when I realized, what am I doing? And it was interesting, and I'll speak for myself because maybe other individuals have had this experience out there. That's when I found that my relationship with food and working out became really sticky. I started having doubts of, oh, I can't eat that. Oh, I didn't work out today, so I can't have a dessert, or I can't enjoy this. The diet culture just came in and hooked me. And, oh, I don't want to bulk up, so I'm not going to lift weights. Meanwhile, in college, I lift weights now. I still love lifting, but it was like, I wouldn't think twice about that. It would be like, like bulking up or anything. It was so bizarre how it changed. And then how I had to work after becoming a mom, being like, wait, no, this is not anything of who I am. And that's where I have this notion of, I'm an athlete for life. And I want my clients to adopt that athletic mindset. And like you said, it's like there's different levels of being an athlete, and they're all athletes. And whenever I see this statistic, it's much higher for girls and a little bit lower for boys, but it's almost, the gap is closing, of around 12 to 13, where that's when they are cut from a sport. That's when I'm going to say they're athletic in that traditional, like you're playing on a sport.
Yeah.
And I think about that and I'm like, if we could reframe the ideology of movement and who is an athlete and take it from that black and white and add more gray area in there, that it's, no, you can be. And I hear it from women who maybe in their 50s, where athletics were totally different for women in the time that they were in their teens, that they were told they're not athletic. So it has become a barrier for them to move their bodies in the gym. When I break down like movements, I'm like, a squat is essentially sitting on a chair. So if you can sit on a chair, I'm making it sound really like I'm being a jerk right there, but I'm like, you can sit down on a chair and stand up. That's a squat. Doing a hip hinge or a deadlift, you have 2 grocery bags in your hand, you got to shut a car door, you stick your butt out, that's a hip hinge. And it's like these movements we see every day, and you can do them, so you're athletic. And it becomes tangible where it wasn't tangible, because the notion was, I wasn't good enough to play sports. I was maybe a little bit more uncoordinated than a peer. So therefore I was cut. And it's, no, everybody has a body. Everybody's body can be athletic.
Absolutely. And I think too, the like idea of athletics having to fit into a certain, whether it's a sport or a certain exercise, or I think too, like I'm a big believer of not everybody is meant to do or enjoy every form of movement. Like it might take some trial and error to figure out what form of movement you actually enjoy or feel good doing. And whether it's like yoga or running or lifting or swimming, there's so many options out there. So I like definitely encourage people to try different things and to not force yourself to do something that you truly do not enjoy.
1,000%. And as a personal trainer, I fully support that. It's yes, I would love everyone to lift weights.
Yeah.
But at the same point, if it makes you miserable, like to the point where you're like, this really feels uncomfortable, there are other ways we can build strength. There's so many forms of movement that have joy. You may not always want to do it, and that is normal. Don't let any fitness influencer or any type of influencer tell you you're just going to love it all the time.
You also really spoke to, I think, the transition away from college athletics, and when you said that's when your relationship with food seemed a lot more challenging or confusing, or you were really vulnerable to all of those diet culture messages. That I think that's a really common experience when, one, it's a huge life transition. And so that's a time when we're probably grasping for control in some way and trying to do everything, quote unquote, right. A lot of athletes are generally pretty high achieving individuals who like to do things well and like to do things to the most. And I think that's a time of a lot of uncertainty when you're transitioning out of, whether it's out of a sport or college or both or whatever that looks like, or even when people are injured and not able to partake in their sport that they usually do. And I think too, with college athletics in particular, there's this like intense amount of structure that is provided in terms of like your day to day, and like you're told when to show up where, and you just go and do it, and you fit in. Like, you don't even have time to think about, you eat the team meal that's provided, or there's a lot less choices, autonomy, and yes, you're still vulnerable to diet culture messages and things like that during that time. But I think that you really kind of hit something there of that transition out of college and the lack of structure, the increased freedom, the time in your life and the life transition that comes with that. And that it's a time when I think a lot of people struggle to figure out, for the first time, you have the freedom to choose how you're moving your body, how much, when, and what are you putting in your body. Some people also go, oh my gosh, this is the first time I have been able to like eat and not care how it's going to impact my run or this. And like, all of those things are valid experiences to go through and experiment with, because there's been so much like potential rigidity around food and exercise for a long time that it's quite a transition.
The thing I love about this conversation is it's really tuning into you and what do you want for yourself. I'm a firm believer, if it is not aligned with your own morals, ethics, and values. And you can come in not knowing what they are, but the more you sit with that and have someone like yourself that can converse over it, and you can be really vulnerable in a trusted space to work that out and understand the internal dialogue and the messaging that comes up. And maybe you never pinpoint exactly where it gets inserted in there, but it helps you become more of you and who you are, and reduces that friction with movement, with enjoying food, with enjoying life and building that community that we all want and we all crave. Again, if someone is listening to this and they're like, I just want to feel stronger and healthier and make it more at peace with food, where should she start this week? And I know, again, it's a loaded question here. And just emphasizing, we're not here to treat or diagnose. If there's a tangible piece, and maybe it's reaching out to someone like you, but where could they start this week?
Yeah, I would say one would be, and this is a loaded one too, but like evaluating what moral value or judgments that you're assigning to food. With a dietitian or a therapist, this could look as like explicit as having a sheet of paper and writing down like good and bad, and just off the top of your head, foods that fall into categories there, and challenging, okay, why is this a bad food and what makes me think that, or where did the messaging come from? And working on, exploring those judgments. And that would be like the first step. You could take it a step further and try and challenge some of those judgments and incorporate a little more flexibility. I would say another very basic one is just making sure that you're eating enough in terms of like frequency and volume and variety. Like those are like these three big: frequency, volume, and variety. If we're not getting a lot of variety, maybe we start with, that's a very simple goal of just going to try adding in one more food group at this meal. I think with the eating enough thing too, like checking in with your body and being really in tune with some of those internal cues, this whole concept of like embodiment, and really trying to pay attention to that felt sense of living through our body and what it's telling us, whether that like sometimes that's hunger and sometimes hunger comes up in very obvious ways, what we think of when we're like, oh, my stomach is telling me I'm hungry. Other times it's, oh, I'm feeling a little irritable, or if we've heard the term hangry, or I'm feeling like my energy's dropped, or my mood is shifting, or I'm thinking about food, which can sometimes be an indicator that we're hungry. So really just trying to honor what our body is telling us. Another obvious one would be just reaching out to a health at every size or kind of anti-diet dietitian or therapist. I think those are always wonderful resources to have the space to really talk through all of this and work with a qualified professional, exploring like where these messages come from, but also what shifts you can make in your day to day. I would say if we're like food too, like maybe even naming or identifying any like rules that you have around food. It's a really common thing that people don't even realize that they are operating from a place of. One that comes to mind is like, I don't eat past a certain time, or not having dessert, or things like that. If we just pause and ask ourselves like, why do I have that rule, or where did that come from, or what would it be like to not have such a rigid rule? That I think all of those things can promote more freedom, more flexibility, and a little bit more peace around food. That
I love that. You touched on so many things. I love this. This has been awesome. And I know there's, like I said, there's so much we did not get to. If you have questions, anyone listening have questions for Paige, you can email the podcast and I can always pass them on to her, and we will have Paige back in the future. Where can people find you? And we'll put your information in the show notes, but if you want to share where people can find you.
Yeah, my website, it's PaigeThompsonLPC.com. is probably the best way. I do have an Instagram handle that I cannot tell you the last time I've posted on it. It's called Therapist Thoughts, like one word, _Paige T. Thank you so much for having me and talking about food and exercise and all that goes into that and living in today's world.
And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for tuning in to Miles from Review, powered by KatFit Strength. If this podcast inspires you, don't keep it for yourself. Hit follow or subscribe to stay updated on the new episodes, and leave us a review to help more women and moms discover this space. Your feedback fuels this podcast, and I'd love to hear what's working for you or what topics you want to dive into next. You can connect with me on Instagram at KatFit Strength, or share this episode with a friend who is ready to embrace her strength. Remember, fitness isn't about perfection. It's about showing up for yourself and finding strength in every step of your journey. Until next time, keep moving forward, 1 mile at a time.